On the morning of September 14, 2019, a 911 dispatcher in Denton County, Texas received an emergency call from 4417 Whitmore Lane, the private residence of paramedic Craig Eller, reporting an unconscious woman on the kitchen floor. When the responding crew arrived, they found Craig Eller standing in his own kitchen, arms crossed, watching the front door. The unconscious woman on the floor was Mara Voss. It was the 7th time she had been transported by ambulance in 3 years. The first 6 times, Craig Eller had been behind the wheel. By the time investigators understood what had been happening inside that relationship, and inside that house, the evidence would reveal something far more calculated and far more patient than anyone in Denton County law enforcement was prepared to believe. A pattern so methodical it had been hiding inside incident reports, patient transfer logs, and routine EMS paperwork for 36 months. In plain sight, filed alphabetically, stamped, signed, and forgotten. To understand how we got to that kitchen floor on a Sunday morning in September, you have to go back to October of 2016. Specifically, to the parking lot of a Kroger on Bell Avenue in Denton, Texas, where a 31-year-old kindergarten teacher named Mara Voss was found slumped against the steering wheel of her gray Honda Accord at approximately 9:40 at night. She was unresponsive. A passerby named Terrence Hobbs, 58, a retired electrician who had just finished buying milk and bread for the week, noticed her through the windshield and knocked on the glass. No response. He called 911. The ambulance that arrived 12 minutes later carried 2 crew members, a newer EMT named Dasha Petrova, who had been with Denton County EMS for less than a year, and a senior paramedic with 8 years of field experience named Craig Eller. Eller was 36 at the time, 6'1", broad through the shoulders in the way that made him look like someone who had played high school football and never quite let go of the identity. His colleagues described him as steady, precise, the kind of medic who stayed calm when other people's hands were shaking. He had commendations on the wall of the station break room. He coached youth soccer on weekends. His supervisor, Lieutenant Dave Hargreaves, told investigators 2 years later that Craig Eller was, without question, the most reliable paramedic he had ever worked with. Mara Voss was transported to Denton Regional Medical Center that night. Blood work came back clean. No alcohol, no recreational drugs, nothing that explained the episode. The attending physician, Dr. Leonard Price, noted mild hypoglycemia and attributed the loss of consciousness to a possible vasovagal response. Essentially, her body had briefly shut down under stress. She was monitored overnight, discharged the following morning, and advised to follow up with her GP. She was otherwise healthy. She was otherwise fine. She told her sister, Rena Voss-Hartley, that she barely remembered the paramedic who had treated her. She remembered the lights. She remembered the feeling of waking up in a moving vehicle and not knowing for a few terrible seconds whether she was alive. The second call came 4 months later, February 2017. Different location. A trail near Lake Louisville where Mara ran every Wednesday evening. Same presenting condition. Unresponsive, no apparent trauma, vitals stabilizing by the time help arrived. The crew on shift that night included Craig Eller. The third call came 6 months after that. August 2017. Mara's apartment on Ridgemont Drive. A neighbor had heard a thump through the shared wall and called it in. Craig Eller was on shift. What investigators would eventually ask themselves. The question that would keep Detective Shona Bramley awake at 3 in the morning, staring at a corkboard covered in transport logs and shift schedules, was not whether Craig Eller had been present for all 6 calls. The records made that clear. The question was something far darker and far simpler. Was he present before them? And then there was the 911 call from Whitmore Lane, the one made from inside his house, the one that showed up in the dispatch system 11 minutes before Craig Eller called it in himself. Someone else had made that call first. The call that arrived 11 minutes before Craig Eller's was logged at 9:02 a.m. It lasted 43 seconds. The caller was female, whispering, and at one point the dispatcher asked her to speak up. She didn't. What she said, what the recording captured, later transcribed and entered into evidence, was this, *, please come. He's done something to me. 4417 Whitmore Lane. Please hurry. He doesn't know I'm, *, and then silence. The line stayed open for another 8 seconds before it disconnected. The dispatcher flagged it immediately and sent a unit. Standard protocol. But somewhere between that flag and the actual dispatch, there was a 6-minute administrative delay, a routing error later described in an internal review as a system anomaly, the kind of bureaucratic failure that sounds almost too convenient when you read it in a report. By the time the responding unit was en route, Craig Eller had already called in himself, calm and measured, reporting an unconscious female in his residence, requesting EMS. His voice, captured on that second recording, carried none of the tremor you would expect from a man who had just found someone collapsed on his kitchen floor. Investigators noticed that. They noticed it immediately. What they didn't know yet, what Detective Shona Bramley wouldn't piece together for another 72 hours, was that Craig Eller and Mara Voss had been in a relationship for nearly 2 of those 3 years. Mara had never told her sister. She had never told her colleagues at Barrington Elementary, where she taught a class of 22 5-year-olds who made her cards for her birthday and called her Miss Mara. She had never filed anything official, never changed her emergency contact information, never updated the name on her lease. The relationship existed in a kind of shadow architecture. Text messages on a secondary phone Bramley found in a shoebox under Mara's bathroom sink, dinner reservations booked under Eller's name at restaurants in Frisco and McKinney, far enough from Denton that they were unlikely to run into anyone either of them knew. Photographs on a deleted Google account recovered by the digital forensics team. The 2 of them at a lake house in East Texas. Mara laughing at something off camera, her eyes dark in the summer light. Bramley told her partner, Detective Roy Achabe, that looking at those photographs felt like reading a letter from someone who didn't know they were already in danger. The toxicology report from the September 14th transport came back 10 days later. It identified traces of gamma-hydroxybutyrate GHB in Mara's system, a sedative, colorless, nearly tasteless when diluted, difficult to detect in standard screenings, which explained why 5 of the 6 previous blood panels had returned clean. One of the earlier panels, the March 2018 episode, the 4th transport, from a restaurant parking lot in Louisville, had flagged an anomalous result that a junior lab technician had attributed to sample contamination and filed without escalation. That report was pulled from archives. The technician, when interviewed, said he had followed protocol. He had. The protocol, it turned out, had a gap wide enough to lose a person inside. Bramley started building the grid. Shift schedules, call logs, GPS pings from department vehicles, Eller's personal cell records, credit card transactions. Every 6th Saturday for most of 2018, Eller had purchased something from a supplement and chemical supply website operating out of Nevada. The purchases were small, the kind of dollar amounts that don't trigger automated review. The items listed were mundane, except that a forensic pharmacologist brought in by the DA's office noted that 3 of those listed items, combined in specific ratios, could be used to synthesize a compound with sedative properties consistent with what was found in Mara's blood. He had been building this. That was the word Bramley kept coming back to. Not committing it, building it. The way you build something you intend to last. And here is the part that should stop you cold. Because nothing could have prepared the investigators for what they found when they pulled the full patient history from Denton Regional Medical Center. Not just Mara's records. All of them. Every patient Craig Eller had transported over 8 years of service. Mara Voss was not the only name that appeared more than once. She was just the only one who was still alive. The second name on that list belonged to a woman named Celia Drummond, 44, a dental hygienist from Corinth who had been transported twice in 2015 and once in early 2016. Celia Drummond had died on March 3, 2016, of what her death certificate listed as cardiac arrhythmia. Sudden onset, no prior history. That single sentence, make sure you log all of that, would become one of the most analyzed fragments of the entire case. A forensic psychologist retained by the prosecution, Dr. Andrea Solis of UT Southwestern, would later describe it as consistent with a controlling personality structure so deeply embedded that even at the moment of arrest, the subject's primary instinct was to manage the documentation, to supervise the record, to make sure that what existed on paper was exactly what he intended to exist. He had been doing it for 8 years. The formal charges against Craig Allen Eller were filed on October 8, 2019. aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, the weapon being the compound identified in Mara Voss's blood work, unlawful restraint, and 1 count of criminally negligent homicide in connection with the death of Celia Drummond, later upgraded to second-degree murder when the medical examiner, Dr. Patricia Osei, completed her review of the original autopsy and identified an anomaly in the cardiac tissue consistent with induced chemical stress rather than spontaneous arrhythmia. The original pathologist had not been looking for it. He had no reason to look for it. A woman with no cardiac history dies in the back of an ambulance. You write down what the evidence tells you. The evidence, it turned out, had been arranged. The trial began in February of 2021, delayed 14 months by a combination of legal motions, pandemic-related court closures, and what the defense described as ongoing challenges in locating credible expert witnesses willing to testify on Craig Eller's behalf. The defense strategy, such as it was, rested on 2 pillars. First, that the statistical coincidence of Eller being assigned to Mara Voss's calls was explainable by shift rotation patterns and geographic service zones, that a senior paramedic working regular shifts in a defined area would naturally appear multiple times in the call history of a patient who lived and worked within that area. Second, that the GHB found in Mara's system could not be definitively traced to Craig Eller as the source. It was in her system. They could not prove beyond reasonable doubt how it got there. The jury took 11 hours. On March 4, 2021, 5 years to the day after Celia Drummond's death certificate had been signed and filed, they returned a verdict of guilty on all counts. Craig Eller was sentenced to 47 years in Texas Department of Criminal Justice custody. He will be eligible for parole review in 2038. He has never spoken publicly about the case. He has never issued a statement. His attorney, at the time of sentencing, described him as disappointed in the outcome. The attorney did not elaborate on what outcome Craig Eller had been hoping for. Mara Voss was present for the verdict. She sat in the second row, next to her sister Rena. She did not cry when the jury forewoman read the word guilty. Rena later told a reporter that Mara had cried plenty already, had cried in the hospital, had cried during the months of medical recovery, had cried during the depositions when she was asked to describe a relationship she had kept secret because some part of her had known. Even then, that something was wrong and hadn't known how to name it. That by the time the verdict came, she said, Mara had nothing left to cry out. She just sat there and breathed. She just sat there and let it be over. Mara's recovery was long and uneven. The neurological effects of repeated sedative exposure over a sustained period do not resolve cleanly. She experienced memory disruption, episodes of severe fatigue, and a form of situational anxiety that her therapist described as hypervigilance, the body's way of compensating for having been betrayed by its own inability to sense danger in time. She took a leave of absence from Barrington Elementary that lasted the better part of a year. Her class sent her cards. 22 5-year-olds who did not know why Miss Mara was gone. Only that they missed her, only that they wanted her to feel better. She went back in January of 2021, 1 month before the trial began. She stood in front of that classroom and read them a book about a bear who was afraid of storms, and how the bear learned that the storm always ended. One of the children asked her if she had been sick. She said yes. The child asked if she was better now. She said she was getting there. That was the truest thing said in this entire case. Detective Shona Bramley was promoted to senior investigator in April of 2021. She keeps a copy of the original dispatch log in a folder in the bottom drawer of her desk. The one that shows the 11-minute gap between the first call and the second, between Mara's whisper and Craig Eller's measured voice. She keeps it not as a trophy but as a reminder of what a 6-minute routing error costs when the person at the end of the delay is lying on a kitchen floor. She has since been part of a statewide review of EMS documentation protocols, testifying before a Texas legislative subcommittee about the gaps in patient transfer records that allowed this pattern to go undetected for nearly 3 years. That review resulted in the passage of amended reporting guidelines requiring cross-referencing of repeat patient transport logs above a threshold of 3 incidents. It is a small change. It is the kind of small change that exists because someone died before it existed. Frank Drummond, Celia's husband, attended the sentencing hearing. He sat in the back. He did not speak to anyone. He drove the 40 minutes back to Corinth, to the yellow house, to the wind chime on the porch he had never taken down. His daughter told a reporter that her father had said, after the sentencing, that he felt something release in his chest that had been tight for 5 years. That it wasn't peace exactly. That he wasn't sure there was a word for it. Just the absence, finally, of waiting. And then there is the question this case leaves behind. Not a legal question, not a procedural one, but the one that lives in the space between all the reports and the records and the stamped and alphabetically filed paperwork. The question Detective Bramley has never answered to her own satisfaction, and says she probably never will. Craig Eller was meticulous. He was patient. He maintained a professional reputation so solid that his own supervisor called him the most reliable paramedic he had ever worked with. He coached youth soccer. He kept his commendations on the wall. He built what he was doing over years inside systems designed to catch exactly this kind of harm, and those systems didn't catch it. They couldn't see it because he had learned to make it look like their own language. He learned to make it look like care, which means the question is not how he hid it. The question is how many people over the course of your life you trust entirely because of the role they occupy. The uniform, the credential, the calm voice and the steady hands and the commendations on the wall. The question is how you would know. The question is whether the system designed to protect you has a gap wide enough to lose a person inside. Mara Voss knew something was wrong and could not name it. Celia Drummond told her husband she was afraid and was embarrassed that she might not be believed. A lab technician filed a report without escalation because the protocol said he could. A dispatcher flagged a call that took 6 minutes too long to route. None of them were wrong. None of them failed. The architecture failed. And a man who understood that architecture better than anyone built his life inside its blind spots. He is in a cell in Texas right now. He does not speak publicly. He does not explain himself. And perhaps that is the most disturbing detail of all. Not what he said, but what he has chosen, with great deliberateness, never to say. The same deliberateness he brought to everything else. The same patience. The same precision. The record exists. It has been logged, as he requested. What it doesn't contain, what no document, no verdict, no sentence can fully account for, is everything that happened in the moments that were never witnessed. The moments before the ambulance arrived. The moments that lived only in the memory of women who were, by design, not conscious to remember them. That is the part of this story that doesn't close. That is the part that stays. Every week, Mindshift Stories brings you the cases that keep investigators awake at night, the ones too disturbing for mainstream media. If that sounds like something you need, subscribe now and never miss a story.